woman gave birth in the ocean, and the baby is born with gills. How does this affect the life of the child? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The horizon stretched endlessly as the sun dipped below the line where sky met sea, painting the waters in hues of orange and pink. Deep in the heart of the Pacific, on a secluded island known only to a few, a woman named Marisol stood at the shoreline, cradling her rounded belly. Her eyes, filled with both anticipation and trepidation, scanned the restless waves. This island had been her refuge for the past 6 months, ever since she discovered she was pregnant under circumstances no doctor could explain. Marisol wasn't alone on the island. There was Malik, a stoic marine biologist who'd once been her research partner, Gloria, a fiery-tempered healer who claimed to have ancestral ties to the sea, and Dorian, an ambitious documentary filmmaker whose obsession with the ocean bordered on fanatical. They all had their own reasons for being here, but Marisol's pregnancy had shifted the dynamic between them. Her condition was unlike anything they had seen. She hadn't just been growing a child, she'd been changing. It started with dreams, vivid, disorienting dreams of diving deep into the ocean, her body adapting to the crushing pressure as gills appeared on her neck. Then came the physical changes, faint webbing between her fingers, a slight shimmer to her skin under sunlight. Malik was the first to notice. He'd been collecting data on her condition, tracking every anomaly with scientific precision. Gloria, on the other hand, insisted it was something spiritual, a sign that Marisol's child was connected to the ocean in ways no one could comprehend. But the complications began in her 3rd trimester. Her heart rate spiked whenever she was away from water for too long, and she started developing a strange sensitivity to air. Malik had fashioned a makeshift tank for her to immerse herself in salt water, while Gloria performed daily rituals, chanting in a language Marisol didn't understand. Dorian, ever the opportunist, filmed it all, muttering about how this would be the greatest documentary of his career. Tonight, the tension among the group was palpable. Marisol had been experiencing contractions for hours, and they were growing stronger. She leaned against a driftwood log, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. Malik crouched beside her, his brow furrowed with concern. "We need to get you to the mainland," he said. "This isn't normal. You need medical attention." "No," Marisol said firmly, clutching his arm. Her voice was hoarse, but her resolve was unshaken. "I'm not leaving the island." "Are you insane?" Dorian interjected, pacing nearby with his camera slung over his shoulder. "If something happens to you or the baby, this whole project is ruined." "Shut up, Dorian," Gloria snapped, glaring at him. She knelt beside Marisol, her hands glowing faintly as she placed them on the woman's abdomen. "This child belongs to the sea. The ocean will guide her." Malik rolled his eyes. "This isn't the time for your mystical nonsense, Gloria. She's in pain, and we're completely unprepared for this." As they argued, Marisol let out a sharp cry, clutching her belly. A gush of water spilled onto the sand, but it wasn't normal amniotic fluid. It was a strange, phosphorescent liquid that shimmered in the moonlight. Everyone froze, their eyes wide with shock. "What the hell?" Dorian whispered, his camera already rolling. Before anyone could react, Marisol's body convulsed, and she fell to her knees. She didn't scream, she couldn't. Her throat felt tight, her lungs struggling to draw in air. Malik and Gloria rushed to her side, but Marisol pushed them away, her eyes wild. "The water," she rasped. "The water." Without hesitation, Malik and Gloria lifted her and carried her to the shore. The moment her body touched the waves, Marisol let out a relieved sigh, her breathing easing as the ocean enveloped her. The contractions continued, but now they were in rhythm with the tide, each wave bringing her closer to delivery. Dorian stood at a distance, his camera trained on the surreal scene. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "We're witnessing history." But as the birth progressed, the atmosphere grew darker. The once calm sea began to churn, and the wind picked up, howling through the palm trees. Gloria's chants grew louder, her voice strained as if she were fighting against some unseen force. Malik's scientific detachment faltered, replaced by a growing sense of dread. And then it happened. With one final, agonizing push, Marisol brought her child into the world. The baby's cry echoed across the beach, a sound both human and otherworldly. Malik reached out to take the newborn, but his hands froze mid-air. The baby wasn't like any they'd seen before. Its skin was smooth and iridescent, shimmering like the scales of a fish. Tiny gills flared along its neck, and its eyes, impossibly bright, glowed with an otherworldly light. Malik stumbled back, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Gloria, however, seemed unfazed. She cradled the child in her arms, her expression one of reverence. "This is no ordinary child," she said softly. "She is a gift from the ocean." Marisol, exhausted but alive, looked at her baby with a mixture of awe and fear. What is she?" "She's yours," Gloria said, handing the baby back to her. "But she belongs to the sea." As Marisol held her child, the baby's gills fluttered, and it let out a soft, musical coo. For a moment, all the tension melted away, replaced by a profound sense of wonder. But the calm was short-lived. From the depths of the ocean came a sound, a deep, resonant hum that sent shivers down their spines. The waves grew larger, crashing against the shore with increasing force. Malik grabbed Marisol's arm, his voice urgent. "We need to get out of here." "No." Gloria shook her head. "You don't understand. The sea has claimed her. If we leave, they'll come for her." "Who's they?" Dorian demanded, his camera still rolling. Before Gloria could answer, the water began to glow, and shapes emerged from the depths. Silhouettes, humanoid but distinctly alien, moved closer to the shore. Their eyes glowed like the baby's, and their movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. Marisol clutched her child tightly, her heart pounding. "What do they want?" "They've come for her," Gloria whispered, her voice trembling. "They've come for the child." Marisol's mind raced as the figures in the water grew clearer. They were tall, sleek beings with translucent, webbed skin that shimmered under the moonlight. Their gills flared in unison, and their eyes glowed with an intensity that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The baby in her arms stirred, letting out a soft, melodic cry that seemed to echo across the beach. Malik stepped in front of Marisol protectively, his body tense. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low but firm. He held up a piece of driftwood as if it could somehow fend off the approaching figures. "We don't know what they're capable of." Dorian, meanwhile, was furiously recording, his camera focused on the beings. "This is incredible," he muttered, his voice filled with awe. "They're not human. This is proof of—" "Shut up, Dorian," Malik snapped. "This isn't the time to play filmmaker." The lead figure stepped onto the shore, the water gliding off its skin like liquid mercury. It stood tall and imposing, its gaze fixed on the baby in Marisol's arms. It raised a hand, long, slender fingers webbed together, and pointed directly at the child. "No," Marisol said, clutching her baby tighter. "You can't have her." The figure tilted its head, as if confused by her defiance. It opened its mouth, emitting a sound that was more vibration than speech, resonating in their chests. The baby responded with a series of soft coos and chirps, her tiny gills fluttering. The connection between the two was undeniable. Gloria stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "Let me speak to them." "You can't be serious," Malik hissed. "We don't even know if they're friendly." "They're not here to harm us," Gloria said, though her tone betrayed her uncertainty. "They're here for the child. They sense her connection to them." "And you think that's a good thing?" Malik demanded. "What if they take her and—" "They won't take her unless Marisol allows it," Gloria interrupted, glancing at the mother. "The choice is hers." Marisol's heart felt like it was being torn in two. She looked down at her daughter, who gazed back at her with those luminous eyes. The baby's tiny hand reached up, touching Marisol's cheek with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. How could she possibly let her go? And yet, how could she keep her, knowing that she was meant for something beyond the human world? The figures in the water remained motionless, their glowing eyes unblinking. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. Then, without warning, the baby let out a piercing cry. The sound was unlike anything Marisol had ever heard, high-pitched and resonant, like the song of a whale. The figures in the water responded instantly, their bodies glowing brighter. The waves surged forward, nearly knocking everyone off their feet. "What's happening?" Dorian shouted, struggling to keep his camera steady. "The baby's calling them," Gloria said, her voice trembling. "She's choosing." "No!" Marisol screamed, clutching her daughter tighter. She turned to Malik, her eyes pleading. "We can't let them take her. We have to stop them." Malik nodded, his jaw set. "We'll fight if we have to." Before they could act, the lead figure raised its hand again, and the water stilled. The glowing figure stepped back, retreating slightly but still watching. It was as if they were waiting, giving Marisol time to decide. "You don't have to do this," Gloria said gently, placing a hand on Marisol's shoulder. "But if you keep her, you'll be defying the will of the ocean. There will be consequences." "Consequences?" Malik scoffed. "What kind of consequences are we talking about?" Gloria didn't answer. She simply looked at Marisol, her expression one of sorrow and understanding. The choice is hers. Marisol's mind was a whirlwind of emotion. She thought of all the months she'd spent carrying this child, feeling her grow and change inside her. She thought of the sacrifices she'd made, the isolation she'd endured, all for the sake of this moment. And now, she was being asked to give her up, to trust these beings with the most precious thing in her life. The baby cooed softly, her tiny fingers gripping Marisol's shirt. For a moment, all the fear and confusion melted away, replaced by a deep, overwhelming love. Marisol made her decision. "No," she said, her voice steady. "She's my daughter. I'm not giving her up." The figures in the water reacted immediately, their glowing eyes narrowing. The lead figure let out a low, guttural sound, and the waves began to churn violently. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. "They're not going to let us go," Malik said, stepping in front of Marisol again. "We need to run." "Run where?" Gloria demanded, her voice rising. "We're on an island. There's nowhere to go." The figures advanced, their movements deliberate and menacing. Malik grabbed Marisol's arm, pulling her away from the shoreline. "We'll figure something out, but we can't stay here." As they retreated, Dorian followed, his camera still rolling. "This is insane," he muttered. "We're going to die, and I'm the only one documenting it." "Shut up, Dorian," Malik snapped again. "Help us or stay out of the way." Marisol's legs felt like lead as she stumbled across the sand, her baby crying in her arms. The figures were closing in, their glowing forms casting eerie shadows across the beach. Just when it seemed they were out of options, Gloria stepped forward, placing herself between the group and the advancing beings. "What are you doing?" Malik shouted. "I'm stopping this," Gloria said, her voice firm. She raised her arms, her hands glowing faintly. "Go. I'll hold them off." "No," Marisol cried. "You can't." "Go," Gloria shouted, her voice filled with authority. "Protect the child. I'll buy you time." Reluctantly, Malik pulled Marisol away, and they fled into the jungle, leaving Gloria behind. As they disappeared into the trees, Marisol glanced back, tears streaming down her face. She could hear Gloria chanting, her voice rising above the chaos. And then there was silence. The jungle swallowed them in an oppressive embrace, the dense canopy blotting out the moonlight. Malik led the way, his grip firm on Marisol's arm as he guided her through the tangled roots and thick underbrush. Marisol clutched her baby tightly to her chest, her heart pounding with every step. Behind them, the distant roar of the ocean felt like a living thing, its fury threatening to overtake them at any moment. "Where are we going?" Marisol gasped, her legs burning with exhaustion. "Deeper into the island," Malik replied, his voice tight. "We need to put as much distance as we can between us and whatever those things are." "You think we can outrun them?" Dorian's voice cut in from behind. He was struggling to keep up, his camera swinging wildly around his neck. "They came out of the ocean, Malik. You think a little jungle is going to stop them? Do you ever stop talking?" Malik snapped, not breaking his stride. "Focus on running or stay behind." "Both of you stop it," Marisol said, her voice shaking. We have to figure out what to do next. We can't just keep running blindly." But even as she said it, a chilling thought crept into her mind. Gloria was still back there, alone. The image of the healer standing firm against the glowing figures haunted her. Was she buying them time, or had they already claimed her? Marisol shook the thought away. She couldn't afford to think about that now, not with her baby's life on the line. They stumbled into a small clearing, the humid air thick with the scent of damp earth and salt. Malik paused, his chest heaving as he scanned the area. "We'll stop here for a moment," he said, his voice low. "Catch your breath." Marisol sank to the ground, cradling her baby as the child's cries softened to gentle whimpers. Her daughter's gills fluttered faintly, and her luminous eyes flickered like distant stars. Despite everything, Marisol couldn't help but marvel at her. She was extraordinary, unlike anything she'd ever seen or could have imagined. But that uniqueness was exactly why the beings from the sea wanted her. Dorian crouched nearby, his camera still in hand. He aimed it at Marisol, the red recording light glaring like an accusation. "You know, this is going to make one hell of a story," he said, his tone tinged with something that sounded suspiciously like excitement. "The woman who defied an alien ocean race to protect her child. People will eat this up." Marisol glared at him. "Are you seriously thinking about your documentary right now? My baby's life is in danger, and all you care about is your footage." "Hey, I'm documenting the truth," Dorian said defensively. "People need to know what's happening here." "Shut it, both of you," Malik cut in, his tone sharp. "We don't have time for this." But before anyone could respond, a low, rumbling sound rolled through the jungle. It wasn't the roar of the ocean, it was something else, something deeper and more primal. The ground trembled beneath them, and the air grew colder. "They're coming," Malik said, his voice grim. "We have to keep moving." Marisol struggled to her feet, her body aching from the effort. "Where can we go? They'll find us no matter where we hide." Malik hesitated, glancing at the baby in her arms. "Then we have to figure out how to stop them." "And how do you propose we do that?" Dorian asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Throw coconuts at them?" "Enough," Marisol snapped, her frustration boiling over. "If you're not going to help, then stay out of the way." Dorian opened his mouth to retort, but before he could say anything, the rumbling grew louder. The trees around them began to sway, and an eerie glow seeped through the foliage. The beings were close, too close. "Move," Malik shouted, grabbing Marisol's arm again. They plunged deeper into the jungle, the glow behind them growing brighter with each passing second. Marisol's breath came in ragged gasps, her body screaming in protest as she pushed herself to keep going. The baby in her arms remained calm, her glowing eyes fixed on the path ahead as if she understood the danger. Suddenly, they burst out of the jungle and onto a rocky outcrop overlooking the ocean. The view was breathtaking, an endless expanse of glowing, churning water, the waves illuminated by the light of the moon and the bioluminescent beings beneath the surface. But there was no time to admire it. "They've cut us off," Malik said, his voice grim. He turned to Marisol, his expression desperate. "We're out of options." Marisol looked down at her baby, her heart breaking. She had fought so hard to protect her, but now, standing on the edge of the cliff with nowhere to go, she realized there was only one way to end this. She had to make a choice. The glowing figures emerged from the jungle, their movements deliberate and unhurried. They surrounded the group, their luminous eyes fixed on the child. The lead figure stepped forward, its hand outstretched. "No," Marisol said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You can't take her." The figure tilted its head, its gaze unwavering. It let out a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in Marisol's very bones. The baby responded with a soft coo, her gills fluttering as if in recognition. "They're not going to stop," Malik said quietly. "Not until they have her." Marisol's grip tightened on her daughter. "She's mine," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's mine." The figure stepped closer, and the others followed, their glow intensifying. The air around them shimmered, and the ground beneath their feet began to crumble. And then, something unexpected happened. The baby let out another cry, louder, more resonant than before. The sound was piercing, almost otherworldly, and it seemed to ripple through the air like a wave. The glowing figures froze, their movements halting as if in response to the sound. The baby's cry grew louder, more forceful, and the figures began to retreat. One by one, they backed away, their glowing eyes dimming as they disappeared into the jungle. The lead figure lingered for a moment, its gaze locked on Marisol, before it, too, turned and vanished into the shadows. The silence that followed was deafening. "They're gone," Malik said, his voice filled with disbelief. "She made them leave?" Marisol sank to her knees, clutching her daughter tightly. The baby's glowing eyes met hers, and for the first time, Marisol felt a sense of peace. Whatever her daughter was, she was hers, and she would do whatever it took to protect her. But deep in her heart, Marisol knew this wasn't over. The ocean had let them go for now, but it wouldn't forget. It never did. The world around them felt unnaturally quiet after the glowing figures disappeared. The rhythmic crash of waves below the cliff became the only sound, grounding Marisol in the reality of what had just occurred. She cradled her baby, whose cries had quieted to soft, rhythmic breaths. Malik crouched beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. Even Dorian, who was usually quick to crack a sarcastic comment or demand an explanation, was silent, his camera hanging limply by his side. Marisol lifted her head, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the moonlight. "Why did they stop?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did she do?" Malik shook his head, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's like she spoke to them," he said. "That cry, it wasn't just a sound. It was communication. She warned them," Dorian said suddenly, his voice unusually subdued. "Or maybe she ordered them to leave." His words carried a strange mix of awe and fear. Marisol's heart clenched at the thought. Could her daughter, so small and vulnerable, truly hold such power? And if she did, what did that mean for her future? "We can't stay here," Malik said after a long silence, his voice breaking the spell. "The island isn't safe anymore. They'll be back." "Back?" Marisol echoed, her voice rising in panic. "But she drove them away. Why would they come back?" Malik hesitated, his eyes dark with concern. "Because the ocean doesn't give up what it claims," he said softly. "And right now, it thinks she belongs to it." Marisol's grip tightened on her daughter. "No," she said firmly. "She belongs to me. I'm her mother." "You don't understand," Malik said, his tone laced with frustration. "This isn't just about her. The beings, the ocean, they see her as one of their own. They're not going to stop until they have her." "And what do you suggest we do?" Dorian interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Build a raft and paddle our way to safety? Because in case you haven't noticed, we're stranded on a rock in the middle of nowhere." Malik ignored him, turning to Marisol instead. "There's a research outpost on the other side of the island," he said. "If we can make it there, we can call for help. Maybe even get you and the baby off this island." Marisol hesitated, glancing down at her daughter. The thought of leaving the island filled her with a strange mixture of relief and dread. Could she really escape the ocean's grasp? Or would it follow them wherever they went? Before she could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, and a low, guttural sound echoed through the air. It wasn't the beings this time, it was the island itself. Malik's eyes widened in alarm. "What now?" Dorian muttered, scrambling to his feet. Malik turned toward the jungle. "We need to move." "No." The group set off again, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like a physical force. Marisol struggled to keep up, her body still weak from the birth, but Malik stayed close, guiding her through the dense foliage. Dorian brought up the rear, his camera clutched tightly in his hands despite the obvious danger. As they made their way toward the research outpost, the tremors grew stronger, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Trees swayed violently, and the air was filled with the sound of snapping branches and distant crashes. It was as if the island itself was rebelling against their presence. "What's happening?" Marisol asked, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "It's the ocean," Malik said grimly. "It's not just after the baby anymore. It's after all of us." They pushed forward, their pace quickening as the jungle thinned out, giving way to a rocky path that led toward the island's eastern shore. In the distance, a faint glow marked the location of the research outpost, a cluster of small buildings perched precariously on the edge of a cliff. "We're almost there," Malik said, his voice filled with determination. "Just a little further." But as they neared the outpost, the ground erupted beneath their feet. A massive geyser of water shot into the air, forcing them to scatter. Marisol fell to the ground, shielding her baby as water rained down around her. When she looked up, her heart sank. The glowing figures had returned, their forms emerging from the geyser like specters. This time, there were more of them, dozens, maybe even hundreds, and they surrounded the group in a tight circle. "No," Marisol whispered, clutching her daughter tightly. "Please, no." The lead figure stepped forward, its glowing eyes fixed on the baby. It raised its hand, emitting a low, resonant hum that sent shivers down Marisol's spine. The baby responded with a soft coo, her gills fluttering as if in recognition. Malik stepped in front of Marisol, his body tense. "You're not taking her," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. The figure tilted its head, its glowing gaze shifting to Malik. For a moment, it seemed to study him, as if weighing his resolve. Then it raised its hand higher, and the ground beneath them trembled once more. "We can't fight them," Dorian said, his voice trembling. "We're outnumbered." "Umesh, this is it?" "No," Marisol said, her voice firm despite the terror coursing through her. She rose to her feet, her baby cradled against her chest. "This isn't the end. I won't let it be." The lead figure stepped closer, its hand outstretched. The other figures followed, their movements fluid and deliberate. Marisol felt her resolve waver, but she stood her ground, her daughter's soft coos giving her strength. And then, something remarkable happened. The baby reached out, her tiny hand glowing faintly as she touched the lead figure's outstretched fingers. A ripple of light passed between them, and the figure froze, its glowing eyes widening in what could only be described as shock. The other figures reacted instantly, their movements halting as they stared at the child. The air around them seemed to change, growing lighter and less oppressive. The lead figure lowered its hand, its glowing eyes meeting Marisol's. For a moment, there was silence. And then the figure bowed its head. The others followed, their glowing forms dimming as they retreated into the shadows. One by one, they disappeared, leaving the group alone on the rocky path. Marisol stared after them, her mind racing. What just happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They recognized her," Malik said, his tone filled with awe. "They see her as one of their own." "But they didn't take her," Dorian added, his voice filled with disbelief. "Why didn't they take her?" Marisol looked down at her daughter, who gazed back at her with those luminous, otherworldly eyes. "Because she chose me," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "She chose to stay." The ground beneath them stilled, and the air grew calm. For the first time since the baby's birth, Marisol felt a glimmer of hope. But deep in her heart, she knew this wasn't the end. The ocean had let them go, for now. But it would always be watching, waiting. And Marisol would be ready. The trek to the research outpost felt surreal in the aftermath of what had just occurred. The jungle seemed quieter, as if the island itself was holding its breath, and the group moved cautiously, the adrenaline of their recent encounters still coursing through their veins. Marisol clung tightly to her daughter, feeling the warmth of the baby's small body against her chest. The child's glowing eyes had dimmed, and her gills fluttered softly with each breath. Whatever connection she'd made with the glowing beings, it had spared them, for now. But the weight of that moment hung heavily over Marisol, raising questions she couldn't ignore. Malik led the way, his sharp gaze scanning the terrain for any signs of danger. He moved with a sense of urgency, but his usual confidence was tempered by the undeniable reality of what they'd just faced. Behind him, Dorian trudged along, muttering under his breath as he checked his camera. The device had miraculously survived the chaos, though the same couldn't be said for Dorian's composure. "I still don't understand," Dorian said, breaking the silence. "They had us cornered. Why did they let us go?" "They didn't let us go," Malik replied, his tone clipped. "The baby made them retreat. That's the only reason we're still alive." "But why?" Dorian pressed. What's so special about her? What do they want? Marisol shot him a glare. She's my daughter, she said firmly. That's all you need to know. Dorian opened his mouth to argue but thought better of it. Instead, he fell silent, his camera still recording as they trudged onward. The research outpost finally came into view as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. The cluster of small, weathered buildings perched on the cliff looked abandoned, the windows dark and the surrounding area eerily still. But to Marisol, it was a beacon of hope, a chance to regroup and figure out their next move. Malik approached the largest building, a storage facility with a rusted metal door. He tried the handle, and to his relief, it creaked open. Inside, the space was cramped and cluttered, filled with old equipment, supplies, and maps pinned to the walls. It wasn't much, but it was a safe place to rest. All right, Malik said, turning to the group. We'll stay here for now. I'll check the comms equipment and see if there's any way to call for help. Marisol nodded, her body sagging with exhaustion as she sank onto a makeshift bench. She cradled her baby, who had finally drifted off to sleep, her tiny face serene. For the first time in hours, Marisol allowed herself to exhale, though the tension in her chest never fully eased. Dorian wandered around the room, his camera aimed at everything in sight. This place looks like it's been abandoned for years, he muttered. You sure the comms equipment even works? We don't have a choice, Malik replied, rummaging through a pile of supplies. If there's even a chance we can get a signal out, we have to try. As Malik worked, Marisol's thoughts drifted to Gloria. The healer had sacrificed herself to give them a chance to escape, but whether she'd survived was a question Marisol couldn't bear to answer. Guilt gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the tiny life in her arms. She's special, you know, Malik said suddenly, his voice pulling Marisol from her thoughts. Marisol looked up, meeting his gaze. What do you mean? The baby, Malik said, gesturing toward her. She's not like us. She's connected to something bigger. Something we don't understand. She's my daughter, Marisol said, her voice tinged with defensiveness. That's all that matters. I'm not saying she isn't, Malik said gently, but you have to face the reality of what she is. The ocean isn't going to forget about her. Those beings, they'll come back. Marisol's grip tightened on her daughter. Then I'll fight them, she said, her voice steady. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her. Malik nodded, his expression softening. I believe you. But you can't do it alone. Dorian snorted from across the room. You're all acting like this baby is some kind of chosen one, he said. Maybe she's just a mutation, an evolutionary anomaly. Marisol shot him a glare. You don't know anything about her. And neither do you, Dorian retorted, though his voice lacked its usual bite. But whatever she is, she's changed everything. You think the world's going to leave you alone once they find out about her? You think the beings in the ocean are your only problem? Marisol's chest tightened at the thought. Dorian was right. If word got out about her daughter, there would be no end to the attention. Scientists, governments, corporations, they would all want a piece of her. And that was a battle Marisol wasn't sure she could win. We'll figure it out, Malik said, his voice cutting through the tension. But first, we need to get off this island. One step at a time. As Malik continued tinkering with the comms equipment, Marisol glanced out the window, her gaze drifting to the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, its surface deceptively calm. But beneath those waves, she knew, a storm was brewing. The beings weren't gone. They were waiting, watching, and they would return. As the first rays of sunlight bathed the outpost in golden light, Marisol made a silent vow. She didn't know what the future held, but she would do whatever it took to protect her daughter. No matter what came next, she would be ready. For now, they had survived. But the fight was far from over. The silence inside the research outpost stretched on, broken only by the faint hum of Malik's attempts to power up the communication equipment. Marisol stared out the cracked window, her mind spinning with possibilities, fears, and the weight of her decisions. Her daughter stirred in her arms, letting out a soft coo that somehow calmed her heart, even in the chaos of their situation. Malik finally let out a triumphant sound, pulling Marisol's attention back to him. Got it, he said, gesturing toward the faint glow of a monitor flickering to life. The equipment still works. I might be able to send out a distress signal. Finally, some progress, Dorian muttered, leaning over Malik's shoulder. You think anyone will actually pick it up? It's better than nothing, Malik replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. But we need to be prepared. If someone does come, it won't just be a rescue mission. They'll have questions about the baby. They're not taking her, Marisol said firmly, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. I don't care who shows up. No one is taking my daughter. Malik glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I know you'll fight for her, he said. But if they send military or government officials, it might not be a choice. You need to be ready for that. Marisol's stomach twisted at the thought. It wasn't just the beings in the ocean she had to protect her daughter from, it was the world above the waves, too. Dorian, ever the opportunist, chimed in. If anyone asks, I'll vouch for you. Call it a professional courtesy. But I still think this is bigger than any of us. If people knew. No. Marisol's voice was sharp, silencing him. No one can know. Not yet. I won't let her be turned into some experiment. The tension in the room was palpable, but before anyone could respond, a sound cut through the air, a low, guttural hum that sent a shiver down Marisol's spine. She turned toward the window, her breath catching in her throat. The ocean was glowing again. No, Malik said, standing abruptly. Not now. The hum grew louder, resonating through the air and shaking the building. Marisol's heart raced as she clutched her baby, who had begun to stir. The child's eyes glowed faintly, and her gills fluttered as if responding to the call. They're back, Dorian said, his voice trembling. Malik grabbed a metal rod from a nearby table, his expression grim. We have to move. No. But before they could act, the ground trembled violently, and a geyser of water erupted just outside the outpost. The glowing figures emerged from the waves, their forms shimmering with an intensity that lit up the pre-dawn sky. They moved with purpose, their glowing eyes fixed on the outpost. They're not giving up, Malik said, his voice tight. We have to run. There's nowhere to go. Marisol shouted, her panic rising. The lead figure stepped forward, its hand outstretched as it emitted the same resonant hum as before. The baby responded with a soft cry, her tiny hand glowing faintly as if in response. Marisol's heart sank. She couldn't run. She couldn't fight. She had to face them. No, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I won't run anymore. Marisol, what are you doing? Malik demanded, his grip on the metal rod tightening. Marisol turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. I'm ending this. They don't want us. They want her. And I need to know why. Before anyone could stop her, Marisol stepped outside, the baby cradled in her arms. The glowing figures froze, their luminous eyes locking onto her. The lead figure stepped closer, its hand still outstretched. Marisol's heart pounded as she took a step forward, then another, until she was standing mere feet away from the being. She held her daughter tightly, her voice shaking as she spoke. What do you want from her? Why won't you leave us alone? The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes studying her. Then, slowly, it raised its other hand and touched its chest, emitting a soft, melodic hum. The sound resonated in Marisol's chest, filling her with a strange sense of calm. The baby responded, reaching out toward the figure. Her tiny hand glowed brighter, and for a moment, Marisol hesitated. But then she let the child's hand touch the figures. A ripple of light passed between them, and the hum grew louder, filling the air with an otherworldly melody. The other figures began to glow brighter, their forms swaying in unison as if responding to the sound. Marisol's mind filled with images, flashes of the ocean depths, teeming with life she couldn't comprehend. She saw vast underwater cities, glowing beings moving gracefully through the water. And then she saw her daughter, older, swimming among them, her glowing eyes filled with joy. The vision faded, and Marisol's knees buckled. Malik was at her side in an instant, steadying her as she clung to her baby. The lead figure lowered its hand, its gaze softening. It stepped back, bowing its head slightly before turning and retreating toward the ocean. The others followed, their glowing forms disappearing beneath the waves. Marisol stared after them, her mind racing. They had left, but why? What had the vision meant? Malik placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. What happened? What did you see? Marisol looked down at her daughter, who gazed back at her with those luminous eyes. They showed me something, she said softly. A future. Her future. What does that mean? Malik asked. Marisol shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know. But they're not gone. They'll be back. The group returned to the outpost, the tension slowly ebbing away as the ocean returned to its calm, indifferent rhythm. Malik managed to send out a distress signal, and hours later, a rescue team arrived. They left the island behind, but the experience stayed with them, etched into their very souls. For Marisol, the journey was just beginning. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: she would protect her daughter no matter what. Whether the world above the waves or the beings below came for her, she would be ready. Her daughter was extraordinary, both a blessing and a mystery. And though the ocean's call would never truly fade, Marisol knew that as long as she had her daughter in her arms, she could face anything. The world wasn't ready for what her child would become, but Marisol would be.